Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Carolina Cruz. I'm here on behalf of Energy Storage Europe, the association representing the storage sector across Europe, and it is my pleasure to be the host of today's webinar, which is entitled The Missing Link, Long Duration Energy Storage and the Future of Europe's Energy Security. We have had over 600 registrations, which shows that the interest in this topic speaks for itself. This will be an interactive webinar, meaning that in the beginning, there will be a couple of presentations from the speakers that I will present in a little bit, but there's a specialized Q&A box in which you can ask questions. If you wish to direct them to the speakers, please refer to their name and organization, or if they are general to the panel, I will attribute them in the end. Again, my name is Carolina. I work at the policy team of Energy Storage Europe, and I coordinated the task force on long duration energy storage, where we produced a policy paper on ways to anticipate the deployment of long duration energy storage. With this, we created a joint letter with other industry representatives, which are present in this webinar, which I will explain a little bit later. But let's go to the agenda. It is quite packed. Almost all of the signatories of the joint letter are here. So we're going to start very strong with Ruben Davies from Clean Tech for Europe, and he will set the scene as to why electrification and AI are reshaping Europe's load curve and why BESS alone cannot bridge the gap of multi-day flexibility. Then we're going to go to Celine from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and she will bring the corporate and industrial perspective. Right after, we're going to have Killian Daly from Energy Tag, and he will address the market and certification angle. After, we have Antoine Kuhn from the Future Clean Tech Architects, and he will dig into the TES business case. Almost last, Aurélien from Flow Batteries Europe will make the case for flow batteries as long duration energy storage. And last but not least at all, we will have Agoza from the LS Council, and she will zoom out on the global picture. So what Europe can do to learn from other jurisdictions and how an EU level coordination is essential to avoid fragmentation. But why are we even here and why now? Europe is building a system fundamentally dependent on weather, meaning by 2030, wind and solar must triple. That creates a growing exposure to, for example, the Dunkelflaut, which means multi-day periods when generation drops across entire regions simultaneously. The technology for this already exists. It's called energy storage and technologies of longer duration. They can absorb surplus, they can bridge gaps, reduce fossil backup, and strengthen energy security. But it's not being deployed at scale, or at least at the scale that we want it to. And it's not because the technology isn't ready, but because markets need to be adapted. Or do they? These are some of the questions that will be answered throughout this webinar. This is why 6 months ago in January, we created a coalition of 9 organizations, and we sent a joint letter to the European Commission at senior level across different units, because this topic sits at the intersection of energy security, industrial competitiveness, and climate policy. We had 4 asks, and on the right side of the slide, you can scan the joint letter. But just as a quick summary, we asked for 1, embed long-duration energy storage in system planning and adequacy assessments. 2, reform ancillary and stability markets and grid fee and tax reforms, this in line with the electricity market design reform. 3, align capacity mechanisms with the European Resource Adequacy Assessment outcomes and the Clean Industrial Deal State Aid Framework. And last but not least, deploy targeted investment instruments and enable long-term contracting. The timing is critical. People in Brussels are very busy. The electricity market design is being reformed. The European Resource Adequacy Assessment is being reviewed. The Clean Industrial Deal State Aid Framework is in action. Soon, we're going to read the revised energy security framework, also the electrification action plan. There are still negotiations under the grids package, and of course, with the Industrial Accelerator Act. All of these files are moving simultaneously, and if long duration energy storage is not embedded in these processes, the window will close. For more information on the joint letter, scan the QR code. And Ruben, the floor is now yours for you to set the scene.
Thank you, Carolina. So yeah, I think you said it well. Europe's flexibility challenge is becoming structural, right? As renewables penetration, electrification, and AI-driven electricity demand continues to grow. The challenge is no longer simply deploying clean generation. It is ensuring sufficient, clean, and reliable capacity during both day-to-day periods and sustained peak demand and prolonged periods of low renewable output. Planning the grid to withstand intraday and multi-day stress events is becoming increasingly important for both energy security and industrial competitiveness. Many long-duration energy storage technologies are now approaching commercial maturity and demonstrating viability in real-world projects. European companies, such as Energy Dome, but there are others, are already deploying commercial projects in Europe and scaling internationally, demonstrating that the challenge is increasingly not technological readiness. The main bottleneck is market design. Many planning frameworks, capacity mechanisms, and electricity markets remain largely duration blind and fail to properly value resilience, adequacy, and long duration flexibility or reliability. AI data centers illustrate the challenge. While some demand-side flexibility will emerge, operators still require extremely high power reliability. Without alternative solutions, growing demand risks increasing reliance on gas-fired generation. This would lock in continued dependence on expensive, imported fuels vulnerable to supply disruptions. Not only is there a gas turbine shortage, but locking in continued dependence on gas also often funds typically the wrong types of regimes. Increasingly, leading data center operators are exploring alternatives, such as long-duration storage, to improve flexibility and reliability, alongside things like data center demand response. LDES can help provide reliable clean power, reduce pressure on grids, and strengthen Europe's energy security. Europe also has an industrial and strategic opportunity here. Alongside deployment, Europe should seek to build globally competitive LDES champions and avoid creating future flexibility markets that rely excessively on imported technologies and concentrated supply chains, particularly from China, which increasingly weaponizes dependence for geopolitical ends. To unlock that industrial and strategic opportunity, policymakers must create bankable market frameworks that reward the full system value of long-duration storage and provide long-term investment visibility. Thanks. Back to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Ruben. The thing that I heard the most, we need to achieve energy security, AI in data centers, and big industrial consumers are looking for these options, and LDES is considered a strategical assets. Celine, do you have the same opinion? I think you will provide the input from the private sector.
For sure, Caroline. Welcome, everyone. So I'm Céline Leguazigo. I'm the energy lead at WBCSD. And this is a CEO-led organization representing 240 companies. And our work sits at the intersection between business competitiveness and sustainability performance. And increasingly, that means focusing on what makes a clean energy system actually work at scale. And that's why LDS is absolutely central for the business case and the investments of those companies. So if you look at the next slide, Ruben explained a lot of after that, a lot of the benefits of LDS, which is increasingly a foundation for the energy transition. Because it curtails renewables, it helps really to avoid relying on fossil fuel backup for decarbonization, because we face also grid infrastructure costs that are not simply viable on the longer term. So with the discussion we had with businesses, we all agree on the fact that LDS will solve all those problems, enabling clean power 24/7, improving the resilience of the system, material scarcity also in the grid expansion. And over time, they really see benefits for lowering electricity costs for their own operations, but also for their customers. So from the business perspective, it's really seen as a true advantage, and they really want and they're ready to invest. Now, the problem, if you switch to the challenges, is that the deployment and the investment are not happening fast enough. And the challenges that businesses face are absolutely structural, as mentioned by Ruben, because we have unclear definitions of LDS across markets, economic viability gaps as well, complex grid integration, and most of all, the policy and regulatory environments is lagging. There's a lack of incentives, the lack of recognitions of the solutions, and outdated rules for participation in various market mechanisms that I'm sure we will discuss a bit later after. And most of the time, it's not technical because we have existing assets that can provide that longer term flexibility across, chemical, mechanical, thermal assets. But it's really about the business case. So there's the good news. If you look at the next slides, we have identified different routes for investment and deployment. And so whether a company is pursuing 24/7 clean energy or grid efficiency or revenue generation, and depending also on the technical configuration of the project, there are LDS solutions and business models that can serve those objectives. So we have discussed with those businesses about co-location with renewables, grid-connected assets, decentralized solutions. It's really a wide range of options that are seen by the businesses as a real asset for the business case. And so we need now to make sure that we understand clearly all the barriers to make sure that we can act all together on that. And that's why last year in 2025, if we look at the next slide, a group of WBCSD members developed a brief to help navigating the investment case for LDS. This is a really short practical guide for companies and investors as well to look at those solutions and the business model that can help to implement and develop those solutions. Each time we outline the risks and opportunities for the businesses to make those investments. And we also identify the concrete action that the private and the public sector must take to close the gap and strengthen the business case. So it's really a collaborative effort between the businesses and also the policymakers and regulators to make sure that we can invest much more and faster into the solution. So I just encourage you to download your copy here with the QR code. And I will stop here and happy to get any question after that.
Thank you, Celine. I've read this publication many times, and I recommend the people listening to also download it. So what I heard from you is, okay, businesses are leaning towards more long duration energy storage to decarbonize their efforts, but also to monetize their businesses. However, there are some barriers that you pointed out, but there's the light at the end of the tunnel. Killian, do you agree with this? Do you have a solution for this? I would like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think it's to kind of echo some of the things that have been said already. The first one is, we need markets and kind of support schemes that really value long duration energy storage, having clean capacity, having clean storage that can deliver in hours when shorter durations cannot. And in general, we don't really have that. And that's something we need to definitely get towards. If you go to the next slide, I can maybe go through an example of this. Or when we look at, this is an analysis we've done at Energy Tag. This is a similar, situation across most European power markets. So here's Germany for the last 6-7 years. On the left-hand side, you have the clean energy percentage on an hourly basis in the German grid. And you see over time, right, the greener it is, that's when there's more renewable penetration. So you see solar coming on really strong. And then obviously in the darker or the black lines, for example, you often see them in November and December. These are these famous Dunkelflaute, where there's basically very little renewable generation in Germany, heavily reliant on coal or gas. And that obviously, if we move over to the right-hand side, which is the price of electricity on the spot market, where we see what happens when fossil fuel prices kind of get out of control, right? And we all know what happened in at the end of 2021 and 2022, the energy crisis related to the war in Ukraine, Russia cutting off gas supplies to Europe, and an enormous price spike in the electricity markets that hurt a lot of industries and still hurts industries today. Since then, we have this kind of pattern emerging where, the more green energy there is, we tend to have very low prices, more and more negative pricing in the electricity markets. And then, in the evening peaks or in those weeks when we don't have a lot of wind or sun, you have, intense price spikes on the electricity markets and much higher prices. Obviously, we need to focus more over time, therefore, on the times when it's maybe harder to get green energy. That is, in general, something when we look at like contracts for difference, for example, they don't generally prefer the technologies or even reward the technologies that are actually able to deliver clean energy in those hours. And that's definitely something we need to move towards a lot more, and we need to probably think about in how we set up our markets, how we set up our support schemes, because otherwise we'll keep on doing the same thing. And one could argue that just adding more solar power in Germany or many other markets today, without thinking about flexibility, short-term and long-term flexibility, it makes no sense, and it possibly is even harmful because you just make prices more and more negative and degrade the business case further. So, I really can't highlight enough how important this is. You also see this in international markets in China. There's similar scenarios happening as they build out their renewable assets. So clean flexibility really has to be put front and center in how we think about and value clean energy generation. And in general, we look at even simple things like how you do tracking of green energy in Europe. We have guarantee of origin certificates that basically say it doesn't matter at all when you produce green energy. It's all the same value. It's all the same price across the year. And obviously that's hiding this reality underneath. And so it's very important to kind of rethink how we think about clean flexibility in that sense. Maybe one final point. I think it's something that can be hard to grasp, but it's something that's incredibly important. So if you're signing like a power purchase agreement, a long-term contract for electricity, if you're able to add in LDES at a sufficiently competitive price, it can really protect you or hedge you in these really, really high priced hours. The times even when lithium ion cannot offer that hedge, that's where LDES can come into its own and potentially avoid market prices of hundreds of euro per megawatt hour. And that's something that I think over time would become central to the business case for these firm or moving towards 24/7 power purchase agreements for companies and somewhere where LDES can really shine. But I think first of all, we need to make sure that the support schemes and the market design are really ramping up those volumes of LDES so we drive those prices down. So my main point is, we're not going to get the LDES we need unless we start to actually value its inherent properties of delivering clean energy when it's most difficult.
Okay, I totally agree with you. So the main takeaway, there's a surge in negative prices, while at the same time, both the industry and consumers are paying a lot for their final energy bill, and there are some alternatives that can make the bill go smaller, be cheaper. And some reform needs to be made. You also mentioned clean flexibility, and I think Antoine has 2 cents on it with the case on thermal energy storage. Does thermal energy storage provide clean flexibility? Let's see.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, indeed, it can. So if we go to my first slide, basically I would like to add another angle to the discussion around long duration energy storage. Usually we think of long duration energy storage as electricity in and electricity out, and as a kind of asset that sits on the grid itself. But there's a variant of long duration energy storage that's called thermal energy storage. You can also call it heat batteries or thermal batteries. And this is a different kind of asset where it's electricity in and heat out. And it makes a lot of sense if we're talking about using this storage for a facility like an industrial plant and a factory that's going to use the energy for heat as its final application. So think about, making steam for the food and beverage industry or that sort of thing. And a lot of our final energy use is in the form of heat. So it makes sense if you're going to use energy as heat, you can store it as heat for when you need it. And so that's what thermal storage does. And if we go to the next slide, please, the good news is that there's a lot of commercial interest, both, first of all, a lot of interest in Europe as a market, because gas prices are high here, so industries are looking to electrify and move away from natural gas, and also for their decarbonization targets. And on the supply side, you have dozens of thermal storage startups that are really getting going right now. That's the map you see on the left, this diagram. Dozens of them. There's many in Europe with the potential for European champions, many in the US, a couple in Australia. And what's really encouraging is in this year and the last year or two, you see the first wave of commercial projects being deployed. And this is really important. And we're talking, proper, not pilots, not demonstrations, proper commercial projects, some of them without even any subsidies at all, that are being deployed. The biggest one to date that I've come across is the one by Antora that opened last week or 2 weeks ago, 5 gigawatt hours, which is huge, and a duration of 100 hours. So this is really long duration energy storage. But the business case for electrification and thermal storage for industrial heat depends by definition on the grid. And this is both sort of physically in terms of access to the grid and that physical grid connection and getting that in a timely fashion, but also the financial business case, because grid fees are often structured in a way that disincentivizes flexibility, and that's quite perverse. So if I have one ask, it would be across Europe to have to sort of reform grid fees to really incentivize thermal storage and flexibility in general. Thank you.
So for the policymakers that are listening, take notes of Antoine's recommendation. Indeed, you showed us that it just reiterates, for example, what Ruben and Celine were saying. Businesses are looking to decarbonize. Some of them are doing with thermal energy storage and even without subsidies. So this is a clear signal that it can actually be done. This is not just imagination from the industry. Aurélien, you had the example of data centers and flow batteries, which I believe further supports Antoine's argumentation. Do you want to step in?
Yes, gladly. Thank you, Carolina. First, if we can go to my next slide, please. I would like to point out that we are having a very timely discussion because the European Commission is expected to publish a proposal on electrification soon, which together with renewable growth is one of the drivers for energy storage. And actually, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission is expecting flexibility needs to double by 2030 and to be multiplied by seven by 2050, compared to, I believe, the capacity installed merely 3 years ago. So this is huge. Obviously, there will be room there for long duration energy storage, so for the needs across days, weeks, and seasonal periods. And I even no longer feel the need to explain why long duration energy storage is crucial in time of energy crisis, which as long as we remain reliant on fossil fuels, we will face those energy crises. Fortunately, to respond to this need in long-duration energy storage, we have European industries to back it up. We have European companies here in Europe for long-duration energy storage. We have had already many examples here in this webinar, and most of them have a more diversified supply chain than most of shorter duration technologies. So, in other words, this need in long duration energy storage, it's an opportunity not just for the energy system, but also it is an industrial opportunity. And so, quite frankly, we must make sure that We don't do as we did in the past, meaning almost nothing. We had already solar PV going abroad. We let lithium-ion batteries go as well abroad. And so now we have this strategic sector, which is long-duration energy storage, with capacity in Europe. And we must make sure that it is strengthened here in Europe and it is scaled up here in Europe. So how do we do that? So I will go to that in one moment, but just before, I would like to give an example on my next slide. So Antoine just stressed that we're not talking just about experimental technologies, and it's the case here as well. I'm giving this example to show you that when we talk about long-duration energy storage, it's not just pumped hydro storage, a very mature technology in one hand, and then on the other hand, just a bunch of startups with experimental technologies. No, you have a wide range of mature technologies that are readily available now for long-duration energy storage. And here there is an example of the AI data center, the FlexBase project in Laufenburg in Switzerland. And so basically it's a huge data center where they are massively installing flow batteries, which is a long duration energy storage technology, because it can address both the need for long-term backup, but also the need to address quick load shifting related to AI. And to make it even better, because flow batteries are non-flammable, they are safe and they are stackable, they are basically piling up the batteries in the basement of this AI data center, which at the same time solves one of the big constraints for data centers, which is land use. So great. And it is measured actually the storage capacity in gigawatt hour at infrastructure scale. So the question is, how do we replicate this success story? How do we spread it, not only in data centers, but across industries, grid, and so on? So on the next slide, I put 2 pillars. Honestly, I could have put more, but here we go. Revenue certainty mechanism. It has been already addressed by my colleagues here, because short duration energy storage is mainly the most rewarded technology on the electricity market. It's not necessarily designed to reward the added value of long duration energy storage. I will not go further there, but also the need for lead markets for European technologies and lead markets for also foreign companies that are opening shops here in Europe. And here the big idea is that we have a need in long duration energy storage. We have the companies to deliver it, and we must make sure that long duration energy storage, it is strengthened in Europe and it is scaled up in Europe. And I hope we'll have the opportunity to discuss it later.
Thank you, Aurélien. Indeed, you made a very strong statement, and I want to follow up with a couple of questions once we're done. But indeed, here you're building the case that we have European companies that are ready to scale. We have European industry who is interested into incorporating these technologies. So what's missing? I'm going to ask you a bit later and we're going to discuss. And so that Ogoza presents the example of outside of Europe. So looks like we have very good examples that we can follow. Ogoza, do you want to let us through it?
Yeah, certainly. So I'll actually just pick up on, if you just go to my first slide, I'll pick up on the example on data centers actually. So as most of us should know, data centers actually hold about 35% of the global hyperscalers globally. So Virginia is really where a lot of the activities for AI and data center happens. And the Elders Council actually was really pleased to hear of the 2026 bill that was a landmark energy procurement announcement for 4.5 gigawatts of Elders by 2045. This was primarily influenced by a grid infrastructure and flexibility study that the state of Virginia actually carried out. So this was the kind of flexibility assessment that led to this bill being announced 2 months ago, last month actually. So that's a really big, really, really big win, and something that European markets can actually start looking into, because the case in point is actually proving itself there. One thing that also points out in Virginia, and something that a lot of European countries could be looking at, is that 20% of the utility elders that's planned for between now and 2045 is going to be in coalfield regions. So that massive use case kind of from brownfields into clean and flexibility demand centers is very encouraging. In New York, the New York State, there've also been a lot of announcements around 12-hour plus duration. And we kind of expected this to change with the change in administration a few months ago, but kind of this stayed the ground because the facts are there that markets in New York, for example, are trying to make sure that their contracts for intraday and multi-day splits by 2030 is heavily secured. We contributed to this advocacy as well. So really just seeing markets in the US, particularly trying to have more direct conversations on where their demand shift is going to happen and what needs to happen to secure that demand shift when it does come. Another example that I would draw out here is California. Kind of a similar case to New York, but I guess the priorities have been very clear that the ongoing need for non-lithium priority for elders is essential to diversity on the CPUC system. So the California Power Utilities Commission has made it a priority actually to stick to a multi-day LDES capacity, which is super encouraging for the market. On the other side of the world, shifting into Australia, Australia has a capacity investment scheme, which basically underwrites new storage procurements and basically giving you that confidence to the markets and letting each state in California understand that there is a need and a pathway to actually follow. An example of that is the long-term energy storage agreement, which is in the New South Wales region in Australia, which was announced in early 2024, and they're going into their fifth round. Oh, yeah, it's on the bottom. And they're going into the fifth round of about 13.8 gigawatt hour of dispatchable capacity. So that's looking into more LDES capacity as well, which is just super encouraging from different states. And I was actually mentioned that a lot of these states have taken out the time for flexibility assessments and looking for ways to reward the system as well as technologies for having more LDES. If you just go to the next slide, please. And there are a lot of examples beyond markets. We're seeing examples in India, in South Africa, in some island nations actually taking that next step to developing an elders market. But really, how can we go back and position Europe for a stronger market like the previous speakers have raised? The first, I probably won't read this all out, but the first is also designing markets that fully capture the value for elders. And this is looking into the duration need and the diversity that needs to be rewarded and that long-term revenue certainty that the pillars that were shared just now captured. There's also the need for procurement mechanisms. So across Europe, we are hearing, in Italy, there's a massive procurement happening. There was obviously the conversation for what's recently going on in Germany. But I think the wider conversation that Europe needs to be having is one technology has the capacity of solving different needs across the energy system, and that's something that needs to be rewarded heavily too. I really appreciate the fact that thermal energy storage was raised in this session because it's something that we tend to skip in the conversation for elders or energy storage for flexibility globally. So ensuring that policies capture schemes that allow for power to heat elder solutions to also participate is critical. We see that kind of in district heating capacity. Also, there's an industrial decarbonization bill going on in Europe as well that we're hoping to make sure LDES is surely captured, not just for now, but for industrialization of the future, especially if European markets wants to capture this LDES as a primary exporter, primary need for energy, for security of manufacturing. And I think also grid fees and tariff structures has been raised. That's something that we also have seen as a key consideration that Europe can use to, in a way, make sure they're shining light or shining example to other regions that are trying to understand where elders can participate. And then different procurement tracks. So elders technologies are very varied in their needs and delivery. So we need to also make sure that different tracks and streams, as we've seen in the UK cap and floor, for example, can actually allow for long-term delivery timelines. And lastly, just wrapping up on data centers is just allowing for flexibility in the needs and flexibility in applications when we actually think about terminologies for procurement across Europe. Next slide, please. At the Elders Council, one way we've been able to encourage utilities and governments and policymakers is to write on the needs for the enablers. So the QR code on the top right takes you straight to the report that captures on this. But what we do say is that there's almost 7, now 8 step, with the 8 being diversity in technology and duration that markets need to take into place. And we're seeing this kind of taking shape now with the deadline in July for flexibility needs assessment. Kind of that's the initiation stage, but also it's not a step-by-step, but a way to make sure all of these different enablers happen subsequently at the same time and making sure that the markets are responsive as much as possible. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ogoze. So, from what I understand, Europe does not need to reinvent the wheel. Looks like there's very good examples from all around the world, and even some member states in Europe are already being the champions that are rewarding these technologies. We will go further into this. We are done with the presentations, and they were short on purpose so that now we have a conversation up until 11. I prepared a couple of questions for the speakers, but I really incentivize people to use the Q&A box because this is really the opportunity to ask the questions that you want to be answered by the speakers. Ruben, if you're still here in the conversation, I took some notes of what you said and what other speakers have reiterated is that LDES technologies are ready for commercialization and that they are essential for grid stability and energy security. These are the things that I heard the most. Celine pointed at some barriers to deployment, but for you, what would be the main one that is really stopping the scaling these technologies at scale?
Yeah, thank you. I'd say the sort of the main barrier is just revenue visibility and bankability, right? It's really not technical at this point, and that cuts across a bunch of different sort of technology buckets, right? Many LDES technologies are ready for commercial deployment, but investors are unwilling to take risks on them because of sort of current policies, right? They need predictable revenue streams, and right now, essentially all of the sort of, just to give an example, all of the money for sort of all the public support for storage is going towards lithium-ion, right? Because of these sort of duration blind markets. So current market frameworks often fail to remunerate the full value of LDES, right? The full value that it provides to the system. So the challenge really, and this is just my high level point, and I'm sure others can touch on this, is that it's less about technology risk at this point and more whether markets provide the sufficient long-term certainty to unlock investment at scale.
Good. Indeed. So public investment needs to be unlocked so that these barriers will be passed. But in the absence of public support, probably the private investment will have to come in. And here I'm summoning Celine once again. So businesses across Europe, as it was mentioned by several speakers, are looking at long duration energy storage to provide affordable energy to decarbonize their processes. But beyond the policy debate and the public considerations that Ruben was saying, what would it concretely take for corporates to put behind capital for long duration energy storage today? So who needs to move first? Is it policymakers? Is it developers? Is it off-takers? What are your 2 cents on it?
Yes, Carolina, I think it's a mix of all of that. Unfortunately, there's no single action that will unlock the business case. I think I can echo really what Ruben said on revenue certainty. So it's really for businesses to have more clarity and longer term view on those revenues, because the economics depends really on stacking multiple revenue streams across energy, capacity, and ancillary markets. It can be extremely complex, and it can take really different configuration depending on markets as well. So really understanding a bit better what is available and how this will translate into revenues is really something important for the businesses, and they need to make that, that effort and that journey to understand that. Obviously, there's an action on the policy side to make those incentives available. But I think one key thing we've heard is that the companies do not want permanent subsidies. What they really want is de-risking mechanisms so that they can really build the business case and scale and duplicate the different projects. So I would say that really finding some mechanism or defining mechanisms that will help with the first movers to invest and deploy the solutions is really something we need to develop much more and faster. And maybe a last point, and more on the investment side. So the clarity on, the definition of LDS and this recognition for investors, it's highly unclear. And really they like sometimes to have taxonomies and really something absolutely clear. But what we see is that the definition is really fragmented, and having something a bit clearer on the policy and regulatory side would help, I think, the whole system to better understand the benefits and what we are talking about, so that they can invest with more confidence.
Thank you. So what I hear from both of you, there needs to be more revenue streams which are not being yet recognized. Killian, right now, if a project cannot show predictable revenues, they will never reach financial close, no matter how strong the technology is. And we have seen through the different presentations that there are very well-established technologies. Can granular energy certificates theoretically create this revenue stream that Ruben and Celine were talking about? Because it maybe rewards the firm clean power at the peak hours, or is this an option? And how mature is the appetite for Europe today? And if there's no appetite, what's the path to put this forward?
Yeah, it can be part of a revenue stack if you obviously, if you look at shorter duration energy storage markets today, yeah, we see places like Texas, which has been really a bastion of build out. It's essentially stalled, right? Because the arbitrage revenues are kind of gone there, ancillary services are gone as well. And so adding more revenue streams is always useful. AFRI and the UK system operator have looked at this in the UK and found that, yeah, indeed, if the revenues for these clean energy products actually valued storage, then what we find is most of the market would be diverted to clean flexibility assets in a way that simply doesn't happen today. I think one European country even issues these green certificates for storage, which is shocking is the only word for that, I guess, that these markets just ignore flexibility altogether. So yeah, obviously we think that that's going to be one important revenue stream, I think in particular, because as the previous speakers have mentioned, long-term contracts, de-risk capital investments. This is kind of economics 101. So we need to really think about how we're de-risking these projects and having the right tools, tracking mechanisms to actually value that clean megawatt hour 1 week into a Dunkelflaute. It does matter, and it does show the value of these types of assets. So I think the granular certificate part is one part of the puzzle, but ultimately what really matters is making sure that we're valuing the clean capacity value of these assets in long-term contracts in a way that we're just not doing today. And that'll involve a bit of a paradigm shift. So yeah, I think that's the main thing. Over time, these can be supported as well by more kind of market mechanisms, let's say, traditional market mechanisms. But I think getting that long-term contracting part right is absolutely essential in the beginning. Maybe one final point. I think, we're starting to see, if you look at the data center question, which is kind of on a lot of people's minds, it's a major issue in the US, probably in Europe now will start a lot more as well. We're seeing non-firm connections being offered to data centers because the grid just can't really handle that peak load. So again, this is somewhere where you can get, the value of long duration energy storage. If it helps speed to power for a data center, I think there you're getting a business case probably pretty quickly, because they value speed to power much more than the price of the electricity. So if they can secure physical power supply because of an LDES asset, because it helps clean capacity, I think that's something that maybe we need to look into further as well.
Okay, thank you. So what I heard the most is that duration needs to be valued. This would be one of the main takeaways. Antoine, going back to you, also, by the way, there are a lot of questions on thermal in the Q&A, and I incentivize people to continue putting these questions in the Q&A. So, the storage spectrum runs from 2 hours, for example, batteries and lithium ion, to multi-day storage system. You even gave us the example of 100 hours. But the business case gets harder the further along it gets. At what point does it currently break? And is that a technology problem or market design? I would also like to hear more what TESS has to offer, especially because the audience is very interested in this.
Sure. So maybe working backwards. So with thermal storage, maybe what it has to offer, I think the key here is it's essential for industrial decarbonization because industry, industrial heat is a big chunk of our emissions, and we're going to decarbonize that by electrifying it. But the problem is electricity prices are quite high in Europe. So if you want to do that electrification economically, you need to target the low price hours. And that's where storage comes in. That's where thermal storage comes in on the site. Going back to sort of the first question on sort of the business case and duration from shorter to longer, it's not really a technology problem. It's more of a market thing or a sort of structural trend where basically you have this sort of double effect of the longer duration you have, the more the business case becomes difficult because on the one hand, your costs go up where you, by definition, if it's a longer duration, you need a bigger energy storage capacity, so more investment to build that asset. And the second thing is your revenue streams become either more uncertain or less good because you're cycling this asset less frequently. So for example, if you're doing seasonal storage and charging and discharging once a year, you have basically one opportunity to make your money back every year. And on the other hand, you've built out this huge asset that has days or maybe even weeks worth of energy storage. Compared to something like a battery for a few hours, which is going to be cycling every day, it's much smaller, and the certainty, the revenue certainty that sort of Ruben was alluding to earlier, is much higher through arbitrage and also through ancillary markets. So yeah, it's hard to pinpoint a kind of single cutoff point where things become uneconomic or economic, but it's more of a sort of trend. Today, shorter is easier and longer is harder from a business case, which is where the capacity mechanisms and those sorts of supportive policies really come in to kind of secure the systemic value and underpin that.
Thank you. Indeed, I think this already answers a couple of the questions from the Q&A, which were how to better support industry investments in such technologies, and in particularly for thermal. And then they give the example of contracts for difference, electrification projects, incentives, 24/7 PPAs. Antoine, do you want to add a little bit more to that? And Killian, do you want to sprinkle something on top? Or are you happy with your answer?
Sure, I'm happy to offer a little bit more on so thermal storage for industrial heat. I think what we're seeing at the moment on the sort of commercial business side of how this is working in practice, a lot of these firms are going for heat as a service contracts, which is quite interesting. Where basically what this avoids is putting the risk on the customer. So instead of saying, I'm going to sell you my thermal battery, my heat battery, and good luck, you operate it, it's now your problem. A lot of those industrial facilities, they might not have the capex sort of cash flow to buy those assets outright. They might not have the expertise in-house to operate those assets and to understand how to charge and discharge them every day. And so these heat as a service contracts basically enable them to just pay a fee. They just say, I want heat at this price. And then the thermal storage provider takes care of the rest. They build the assets, they've put up the capex financing for it, and then they operate it because they know how this thing works. They understand how electricity markets work, and they can arbitrage that. So that's how things are shaping up at the moment, and I expect we'll see more of that, going forward.
Okay, thank you. Killian, do you support
Yeah.
what Antoine just said?
Well, I think, when you're looking at electrification of heat, for example, or other applications involving electrification, one of the barriers is obviously the electricity price. And also the lack of ability to hedge that electricity price over the depreciation time of the assets. So that's somewhere where I think, we could have smart policy ideas that try to solve two problems at once. So on one side, on the supply side, try to get that long-term contract so you can build the renewables, build the LDES together to create a portfolio of assets. And then on the demand side, also offer kind of competitive long-term visibility on the key part of the financial model, which is what is the price of electricity going to be, and give a bit more certainty to the investors on that side. So one thing you could do is kind of look at policy mechanisms that, let's say, bridge the gap between the price desirable or needed on the demand side to make the project pencil, and also the price needed on the supplier side to get that clean, firm power into the electrification process. That's something that we kind of have advocated for a while, and I think would be a pretty elegant policy solution. Because again, if you look at how electricity is supported today with things like contracts for difference, there's obviously no hedging benefit for the industrial consumers there. That is just kind of shows up in the electricity market, and actually reduces liquidity and things like forward electricity markets. So I think that is something that we should think about a bit more, because all of this is ultimately about price, right? That is really what this is all about, and offering kind of hedging mechanisms. So that's something I think we should definitely focus on, and could have some elegant ideas to solve two problems at once.
Thank you, Killian. We have 7 minutes left, and I still want to hear from Aurélien and Ogoza one last time. Data centers were mentioned many times in the last 1 hour, and their surge and the demand for them in Europe represents a major and largely untapped opportunity for long duration energy storage deployment. In this field and others, how to make these potential markets a reality? Is there something missing in Europe, Oren?
Yeah, thank you. I will take the broad question first about the others, because I think it's not only about AI, obviously, it's about the other industries, the grid in general, and so on and so on. So I will echo some of the points that were already mentioned by the colleagues, but I believe in the power of repetition when it's important. I will make it quick. But first, you need to be aware of why you need long duration energy storage. You need to be aware of how much you need long duration energy storage. And I think in that respect, we have flexibility needs assessment reports that are coming at national level in July, hopefully. That will be a very important first step in that direction, even if the methodology is not perfect for LDES. By the way, there is a question from Emma Menegatti about it. If we had more time, I would gladly take it, because it's very important, even if it's a bit nerdy. We also need revenue certainty mechanisms, and it has been already mentioned many times, and why. I think that we also need lead markets, whether it is through soft law or through legislative initiatives, to make sure that this need in long duration energy storage, it is also answered by European technologies, and that we're scaling up here in Europe. So that is not scaling up somewhere else, and then we replace dependence on fossil fuels by independence on clean tech technology that we are no longer able to produce here in Europe. Then, and I will make it quick, about data centers in particular, and AI data centers. The example I gave, it's a private project. It's a private project, and it is already for them. We see business case here to make it happen and to have flow batteries there. I'm praising a bit my church here, but basically, data centers owners, they mentioned 3 problems for them. It's the land, the energy, and permitting. The land, I mentioned, flow batteries is the case for it, because it's stackable, it's not flammable. So you save land. The energy, it is able to both address the need for long-term backup, but also the peak loads, the quick peak loads. So then you are left with the permitting and think that in this case, there is something that can be done. It's, for instance, to maybe provide quicker and easier permit and also grid connection to data centers, AI data centers, that are able to show that they provide grid stability and also services to the grid, and that would be a way to meet different ambitions here and to promote the technology as well.
Thank you very much, Aurélien. We're 4 minutes away. Ogoza, as I said before, and from what you presented, looks like Europe does not need to reinvent the wheel. I'm not asking you to pick your favorite child, but which country has come closest to building a genuinely eldest-friendly policy framework? And what is the single feature that Europe could or should adopt most urgently?
Yeah, thanks. It's not a case of what country, it's a case of what policy. So there are particular countries that are approaching things on a state level. So, for example, in Australia, Victoria, New South Wales have got different approaches because their system needs are very, very different. And in the US, from New York to California to even Virginia, the system needs are very, very different. So it's different. It's very difficult to say what country in particular because Europe doesn't really work in that regard. But it's more of what system needs that they're trying to address, right? So I think it's a case of knowing what your system needs need. And then I guess in the longer policy need is making sure that the procurements requests and rules capture for a diversity of technologies and durations. I feel like that's something we've seen from Australia to Virginia recently announced. There is a diversity in durations for technologies that we know are commercially available, as well as a diversity in duration. And I think considering the runway that elders technologies need, I do want to say that getting the right policy by comparison advantage for Europe. If not done now, then Europe could honestly be getting late in the stage of making sure that elders is properly positioned to capture that true value, to make sure there's more grid stability and in essence reliability for energy systems. Thanks.
Thank you. We're almost at the finish line, and I want to ask a question to all of you. So we're going to be very busy in Brussels in the next couple of weeks and next couple of months because the energy security framework is going to be coming out, as well as the electrification action plan. There are the negotiations on the grids package, as well as the Industrial Accelerator Act. There will also be an initiative on AI data centers and in the energy sector. And this is a once in a decade opportunity to get long duration energy storage embedded into this architecture. In a couple of seconds, if you could insert a sentence, a line, or a consideration in any of these texts, what would it be? So basically, I'm asking you what's your Christmas wish, but in June.
Well, I would
Yeah,
say to properly recognize thermal storage, and yeah, to widen the recognition beyond just batteries. And yeah, sorry, I'll keep it short. I'll stop there.
It's 2 sentences. Thank you. Aurélien.
Yeah, thank you, Santa Carolina. So my wish for this year, it's well, except for maybe the most emerging technology, there is no need to feed us with subsidies. Just provide revenue certainties and provide lead markets for European technologies, whether it is through public procurement or auctions.
Thank you. Killian, last Christmas wish.
Design for the outcomes we want. So the outcome is clean, firm power. Stop picking different technologies.
Thank you very much. I have took note. I will send your letters directly to the European Commission, and let's see if your wishes will be made true before summer comes. We are going to close the webinar now. We do fully recognize that a lot of the questions from the Q&A box were not answered, but we will follow up with an email to the attendees so that we can help you reply to these questions or direct to the experts that were in this panel. Once again, thank you very much for taking the time to be here today and give your 2 cents on why long duration energy storage is important for Europe. And this series will continue forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It was
Thank
great.
you, bye.
Thank you.